It finally happened. We now have what is probably the last trailer for Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 before the new chapter releases. And not only did this one give us the release date for the chapter, but I also believe it gave us some huge clues for the upcoming story, many of which tie into a lot of the theories that I've been making over the last couple of years. And even, in my opinion, a sneaky little reference to Game of Thrones. No, I'm not joking. So as usual, I'm going to give my breakdown, my analysis, and my theories on this trailer. But before we get into that, this trailer does indeed give us the release date for Chapter 5, but unfortunately the copy that the partners in crime were given is a copy without that release date, so at time of recording, I have no idea when this chapter is going to release. Now, I'm expecting it's going to be the end of January, but it could also be in February, and I'm really hoping that it's not, because we've already got two massive game releases coming in February. We've got Resident Evil Requiem and Reanimal, which is two pretty big games that I'm looking forward to. So I'm really hoping it's not February. And if it is February, there'll be a pinned comment down below. And you should probably go read it because it will sum up my emotional feelings on this chapter. But regardless, even without knowing the release date, this trailer is pretty huge. I think there are a bunch of little clues in here, some more obvious than others, and as usual, I'm going to break it down and give my thoughts on it, but I think this is one that you should definitely pay attention to. So the first shot of the trailer shows this room, which we've seen other angles of this room, or we've seen rooms that are similar to it, and this one looks very fun. It looks like a children's TV show set or something like that. Now, this room is probably a room where the orphans were being held when they're waiting for surgery or something like that. But again, I think this is tying into the theme of this series of facades. This is a fun, bright looking room that is actually in a very, very dark and disturbing area. And we'll see some of that in this trailer as well. But I think this is tying into the themes of this game series quite a lot, that many of the places in Playtime Co. and the characters themselves are putting on a front. They are themselves a facade. We then get a shot of this corridor. Now, we've seen a bunch of different shots of these corridors, and they all look to be in some form of disrepair. Now, that's already in itself a big thing that we've been talking about all the way back since Chapter 2. This entire factory, even some of the higher levels of the factory, is completely falling apart. It is run down, it is collapsing in on itself, and you'll even see more evidence of that in this trailer. But this factory is a ticking time bomb. It is going to collapse eventually, and whether that's because Warren back, didn't do a great job, or maybe it was because they were being threatened, by the staff of Playtime Co. I don't know. But this factory is definitely going to collapse eventually, and I think this is why the prototype says he's running out of time. He knows that if he doesn't do whatever he's trying to do quickly enough, then everybody's going to be buried underneath thousands of tons of rubble. But another really interesting thing about this scene in particular is we can see the wall over here. It has a sign saying, "Attention, no surveillance beyond this point." Now, this is also very telling because in Playtime Co., it's been a massive thing throughout the entire series that there are cameras absolutely everywhere. Not only are there cameras absolutely everywhere, but Playtime Co., the company, when it was still active, were constantly spying on their staff, even when their staff didn't know about it. So this idea that this area is one that isn't under surveillance is very telling, because this is the only area of the factory where they specifically don't record anything. Why don't they record anything? Well, that's pretty obvious, because whatever's going on down here is incredibly horrific and incredibly illegal. The scientific process, aside from being incredibly unethical, is also incredibly illegal. This is something that should not be happening. Playtime Co. were breaking so many laws with this. And I think there's a double whammy here. They don't want people to learn the science because this is a very closely guarded secret. I mean, wouldn't you guard the secret to potential eternal life? I would. So the idea that they don't want anybody to learn this secret who shouldn't, but also the idea that they don't want this information or evidence of this scientific process and all of these surgeries of turning people into living toys, they don't want any evidence of that getting out. So this entire area is not under surveillance, which is kind of an interesting new thing for the series, because there probably won't be as many CCTV tapes for us to watch. So we're going to have to learn things through our own eyes, which I think we're being deceived by several characters already, so that's going to be interesting. We then get this quick shot of a chair in front of a projector screen, kind of close to it, honestly, and I think this is potentially showing a bit more of Playtime Co.'s indoctrination. We know that as a company, they have been indoctrinating the children to go into things like science and do things that they want them to do. But this could also be a little hint towards the conditioning that we learned about back in Chapter 2 as well. Seems to be a lot of connections to Chapter 2 in this trailer, but we know that Mommy Longlegs was sent for conditioning, which was implied to be psychological conditioning, and this could be evidence of that. This might be the area where they did the conditioning to get people to behave in ways that they wanted them to behave. But it's also really cool that this chair is made out of Pianosaurus parts. Now, I wonder, this is just a little theory, but I wonder if this is Mob hinting at they are actually going to bring Pianosaurus back for Chapter 5. This was something that was quite a big criticism of Chapter 4. There are quite a lot of criticisms of Chapter 4, but one of the big criticisms of Chapter 4 was that they made this big deal about Pianosaurus. He had his own trailer and all of that stuff, and then Pianosaurus was in the game for 5 seconds and then was killed off. So maybe, and they have acknowledged that feedback as well, so maybe this is a little hint that we are going to actually get a sequence with Pianosaurus, because they already have all the assets, so, you know, they would be able to do it. So I hope Pianosaurus gets his moment to shine, and I hope they give some love to some of the other dinosaurs in Playtime Code 2. You know which ones I'm talking about. You know which ones. Finally, in this scene, we also see again the ceiling. It seems to be shaking, almost feels like an earthquake. And then we see all of this dust fall from the ceiling, which is just another hint to the idea that, again, this place is on very borrowed time. This place is going to collapse eventually, even without all the things like Poppy trying to set off bombs and stuff. Now, we also get this scene, which is really odd. We see this giant thing here, which obviously it's a giant hand. Hands are a massive thing throughout this series. There's a lot of symbology with hands. Beyond the grab pack hands that we use, there is a lot of hand symbology. But this one, to me, looks like one of the stasis chambers. I think this is where the orphans are being held. If you look at the bottom, you can see that this hand is on a hinge, so it clearly opens, and there is a little window that we look in. This really reminds me of games like Fallout, when they have their stasis chambers. So I'm wondering if these are the stasis chambers that the orphans are being held in. But it is also kind of interesting that it's under super heavy security too. Like there's this massive blast door, and then there is this heavy duty metal coffin, essentially. Probably what we could call it, a coffin. But if this place does collapse, those children, if it is children, or whatever it is inside there, is going to be buried alive, which is horrifically horrifying. Horrifically horrifying? Great. You know, when I don't script a video, this is what happens. It's terrifying, okay? It's terrifying, the idea that you could be buried alive in something like this. So yeah, interesting, definitely interesting room. If it's not the orphans, I have no idea what's being locked under such lock and key, because we already saw the prisons in Chapter 4 for the toys. So if they were locking Yarnaby in a prison, what would they be locking in that? So I definitely think it's the orphans. We get another shot of the prototype walking through the corridors. We've had quite a few of these across the trailers for this chapter, but this one really does highlight just how dangerous this character could be. We see that he is obviously mostly made out of metal, but he's so heavy that he is literally breaking the floor that he walks upon. Now, that in itself could be a little bit of a metaphor if you really think about it. The idea that the prototype is just trying to do something, and whatever he does, he breaks, you know? Well, which will also tie into the name of this chapter, which I think is a reference to Game of Thrones, but we'll come on to that. But the idea that this character is so heavy shows how dangerous he really could be if he wanted to. I do think the prototype could take on any of the other experiments. I don't think they'd stand a chance. If you want my honest opinion, I think he could take any of them on in a fight, which again shows how he doesn't do that even though he could. Again, keep that in mind. Now, this scene is incredibly interesting because we see several of the Poppy masks, and we've seen some of these in the thumbnails, and some people have suggested that seeing Poppy's mask was a hint that Poppy's going to die or something like that. But we can see clearly here there are multiple of the Poppy masks. Now, that does make sense because we know that Poppy has been experimented on several times, or we know that she's been fixed several times. There was the very first trailer that I've talked about many times before where we saw her voice box getting fixed. But we also know from one of the tapes in Chapter 4 that Poppy talks about how they were constantly taking things out and putting things back in, and it was this horrific experience for her, which that also ties into the title of this chapter, which again, we'll talk about that in a little while. But it also could be a hint to the thing that I've been talking about all the way since Chapter 1, that Poppy is two-faced. Now, in my last video, I talked about the idea that I still think Poppy is hiding something. She's been so shady. Ever since Chapter 1, we released her from a case. She has been so shady. She only tells us what we specifically need to know in that moment, and everything else she'll tell us later when it's convenient for her. She's definitely hiding a secret, and whether that secret is something that she's keeping from us for a good reason, maybe, but it also could be something that she's keeping from us because she is manipulating us. And I think that's more likely. I think Poppy is the great manipulator in the series, not the prototype. But we can definitely see that there are multiple faces here, which means the prototype is keeping these for a reason. Maybe he's keeping them in case he needs to fix Poppy again, or again, maybe there are multiple Poppies. That's another idea that we haven't really explored in the series yet. There could be multiple Poppy dolls. So that's an idea. But yeah, I think this is definitely a hint that Poppy isn't being quite as honest as she appears, and she's definitely being two-faced. We even saw that with her and Dowie. Remember that? We saw a little bit of her two-facedness when she said one thing to us and a different thing to Dowie. Now this one just shows some tubes. This is likely one of the experiments that the prototype has been doing since the factory fell. And you can see this liquid going down. Now this liquid, it could be a mixture of blood and something else, but I think it's definitely more likely to be the Poppy gel. And I've theorized in my last couple of videos that I think the Poppy gel is what the prototype is trying to figure out. Maybe he hasn't got it quite perfect, I don't know. But I definitely think this is that Poppy gel mixture, although it could be mixed with blood as well, I don't know. But we can see that this is being pumped into this, probably what is this unfortunate victim in the next scene. Now this one shows the prototype's POV, and what makes this one really weird is that you can see there's this color filter, which now to me, it makes it look like Silent Hill. I don't know, with all the blood and rust, it makes it look like Silent Hill to me. But I wonder if this is trying to show that the prototype, with him being one of the earliest experiments, he doesn't see the world as we do. He sees it with this filter over it. Again, the science hasn't been perfected when they made him, so maybe his vision is very different, like a lower grade vision. I don't know. I just thought it was really cool. I like the tone of this one quite a bit. But we also see that he is doing the surgery, and we'll see that in a little minute too. Now, what's even worse, I think probably the most terrifying part of this entire trailer is what we see next. We see what looks like it's kind of similar to BoogieBot, but bigger. But this is in the surgery room, and we see this robotic character and this robotic arm in what is very likely a surgery room. Now that means that these robots are being used to do the surgery on the children. Now, one thing that I will say, we've known many times now throughout this series that the Playtime Co.'s plans, or their experiments, the science, all of these things were flawed in many ways. And a lot of the times their plans didn't go the way they hoped they would. And I think this is probably why we had so many failures. We know that a big thing in chapter 3 and 4 were that there were failures to these scientific experiments. And every time one of these scientific experiments failed was essentially an orphan being killed, many times without their consent, without them agreeing to it. And so the idea that Playtime Co. created a robot to do surgeries on orphans to turn them into toys is a whole video in itself. I could talk about that for probably a whole day. But I definitely think this is incredibly chilling that it wasn't even necessarily human hands doing the surgery. It was a robot that could malfunction, that could break, that could decide one day that it's sick of the flesh suits and wants to get revenge. I don't know. I think this is kind of sick. And I think that that's, again, a really cool and interesting part of the horror of this series. Also, robotic hand symbology. It's everywhere. It's just everywhere. We then see one of these again. And again, I think this could be one of the wrong side Outimals, but I also wonder if this is one of the experiments that the prototype has been doing in the last 10 years. And we see in a minute that the prototype is holding a scalpel. So it does look like the prototype is personally doing some experiments, even though it doesn't really look like it's holding the scalpel very well. So I don't know if these experiments are so weird like this because the prototype is, you know, he's not exactly the best surgeon. I don't know. But either way, we see there's a lot of blood on the wall. I don't think these surgeries are as clean as they could be. Let's just put it that way. We also then see the experiment moving a little bit, and you can see down on his foot and on here, you can see he's got a bunch of this liquid. Now, I did make a whole theory, and if you haven't watched it, go watch it, because I actually thought it was a pretty good theory. With my last theory, I theorized that the Poppy gel liquid is designed to grow into the body. It's designed to grow new muscles and new nerve endings and things like that. It's designed to grow the body inside the toy body so that they can function as a living, breathing creature. And yeah, it definitely seems like the way that it's snaking up the leg like this, I think I might have been right with that theory. Again, if you haven't watched it, go watch it. Now, this one is really odd because we see the scalpel, probably the one that the prototype was holding, and then it turns, and if you look closely, you can see what looks like a face. Now, at the end of this trailer, we get what should be the reveal of the main antagonist. For almost every chapter, pretty much except one, we've had the final chapter that gives us the release date will actually reveal one of the main antagonists of the chapter. We saw Mommy Longlegs get revealed in this way, we have seen Catnap get revealed in this way, and we've also seen Yarnaby get revealed in this way. Although arguably Yarnaby wasn't the main antagonist of chapter 4, but it was one of them. So every final trailer seems to reveal the villain. But this one didn't. I think this one not revealing the villain, you could take it two ways. One, you could take it that Mob Entertainment just don't want to reveal the prototype yet. They want to keep it a surprise for the chapter. I think that's most likely anyway. But it also could be that, again, this is a hint that the prototype isn't the main villain of this chapter. Now, we saw this with Dog Day. We saw this Dog Day in chapter 3. We saw what looked like was going to be an enemy and turned out it was actually a friend until it was then taken over by the smaller ones and then it became an enemy. But you see what I'm saying? So it is possible that this is, again, a hint that this is like a Dog Day situation where we're going to see the prototype and the prototype isn't going to be the main villain of this chapter. Now, the name of this chapter is Broken Things, and I think there are some really obvious meanings to this name, but I also think there are some less obvious meanings for this name. Now, the obvious ones are pretty much everything in Poppy Playtime is some form of broken. The location is broken, most of the characters are broken, both physically, like Huggy Wuggy is, very broken, but then also mentally, many of the people in this series are broken. I think Poppy is clearly broken, both her face and her mind. The playable character, they are broken. We still don't know if the player is a man or a woman, but the playable character is clearly broken. They're suffering with an immense amount of guilt. I think the prototype is clearly broken with years of trying to run this horrific place. I think pretty much every character in this series is in some way broken. And I think that the idea of things being broken physically and mentally makes sense. Broken things. We also see these new experiments that the prototype is creating also seem kind of broken. So again, broken things makes a lot of sense. But this could, and an emphasis on the could, this could be a reference to Game of Thrones. And the more that I looked into this, the more that it really does make sense that this is indeed a little Easter egg to Game of Thrones. Now, before you start unsubscribing and yelling with your pitchforks that this is a stretch, this is a reach, hear me out, okay? In Game of Thrones, there was a famous quote by Tyrion Lannister. Some spoilers for Game of Thrones. If you've not watched it or read it, this is on you. Oh, strong language, by the way. If you're watching with your grandma or something, maybe skip this bit. But in Game of Thrones, Tyrion Lannister once said,
"I have a tender spot in my heart for cripples, bastards, and broken things."
But that line in itself had so much meaning. In this moment, Tyrion was talking to a young boy who had just been crippled. He had just been pushed out of a window and broken both of his legs, never going to walk again. And he showed him some kindness because he says he had a soft spot for, people born out of wedlock, cripples, and broken things. And as Tyrion was a dwarf, which at the time was seen as a huge negative because men were supposed to go out and fight wars or work on farms or both. So, a man being so small was seen as a huge negative. But not only that, Tyrion Lannister, in many, many ways, was viewed by many people as a villain. Now, this is really interesting. In the show and in the books, Tyrion is described by many people, he's named the Imp. And the reason why he's named the Imp is people think he's this maniacal, scheming, evil little man. And particularly in the books, he also looks a lot more ugly than he does in the show, particularly after one of the battles where he loses his nose. So he literally looks evil. And so throughout the show and the books, people are constantly judging Tyrion by his appearance and his reputation. Both of those things paint him as this evil little creature. And even the viewers or even the readers at the beginning of this series, you also view Tyrion Lannister as a bad guy. The Starks are the good guys and the Lannisters are the bad guys. It's just how it is. But the more you read or watch the story, the more you realize that Tyrion Lannister is probably one of the most noble characters in the entire story. Yes, he drinks every day. Yes, he likes women and he pays for their services. Yes, he does all of these things. And yes, he does scheme and make plans. But first of all, everybody does. in Game of Thrones. It's the whole point of the show or the story. Game of Thrones is called Game of Thrones because everybody in that story is trying to rise to the top. Everybody's trying, well, most people are anyway. Most people are trying to gain power, whether it's for a good reason or a bad reason, it doesn't matter. Everyone's trying to be that top person. They're trying to be that king or queen. That's why it's Game of Thrones. And throughout that, people are constantly backstabbing each other. You have allies that betray each other. You have enemies that then become allies. You have all of these plots and schemes and backstabbing and betrayals and all of this, all because everybody wants more power. Whereas Tyrion, yes, he is scheming and plotting. He's usually doing it to try to make his family better. He's trying to save his brother and sister, even though in a lot of ways, they don't do it for him. His own father hates him, for an example. But what makes Tyrion such an interesting character is a lot of people view him as a villain, even though realistically, compared to everybody else, he's one of the good ones. Now, if we compare all of this to Poppy Playtime, it fits perfectly. So in Poppy Playtime, you have this company they're the kings, if you will, of making toys. They rise to huge successes, this empire in the toy making business. But secretly all along, they were doing shady stuff in the background. Now, that empire, just like the great houses in Game of Thrones, which rise and fall constantly, that empire itself ends up falling. And once that empire falls, a new one is propped up with a new king. Elliot Ludwig was the original king. And now, after he goes, there was a power struggle between all these new kings and queens who all wanted to be on the top spot. And now the prototype did a big betrayal, like the Red Wedding, killed everybody, and now the prototype is on top. But now that the prototype is on top, he's brought his new empire, now everyone's trying to bring him down and make their own new empire. Poppy's trying to overthrow him and make her own place with Dowie. You see how this really kind of fits? It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. You have people backstabbing each other, backstabbers and traitors, as Harley Sawyer put it. You have people trying to one-up each other. You have people trying to get power. And I think this is exactly why Poppy is going to be the villain of this series. I think she, just like everybody else, is trying to do something for her own gain. Now, if we compare Tyrion Lannister and the prototype, both of these characters look evil. And because they look evil and what they are doing appears to be evil, people assume that they are evil and they assume that they are villains. Now, the same thing with Tyrion, where it turns out that yes, he did do some bad things, but he wasn't really a villain. I think the prototype is exactly the same. Remember, no one ever talks about the idea that the prototype saved Theo's life. He sacrificed his own freedom to save Theodore. He didn't need to do that. He could have just left. Okay, but he did. He saved Theo. And I think ever since the Hour of Joy was designed to bring freedom to those toys that were being treated so horrifically by Playtime Co. They were being experimented on without their consent. They were being used by adults as pawns in their own games. They were being created, turned into weapons, right? All for adults who didn't really care about them. And so I believe the prototype viewed the Hour of Joy as a necessary evil to free the toys. But after doing that, there were suddenly all of these toys who didn't agree with the Hour of Joy, which is valid. It's valid. But they didn't agree with it, and they didn't agree with what the prototype did. And so now you have all of these factions once again that are fighting, scrabbling for power, trying to overthrow each other. And the prototype, I believe, thinks he's doing what's best for the orphans, what's best for these experiments, but a lot of people don't agree. It's human nature. And so I think just like Tyrion Lannister, we are viewing the prototype as this evil character, when in reality, the truth is a lot more complicated than that. Again, not saying the prototype didn't do bad things. Tyrion Lannister did bad things. He killed his own father. Spoilers. But you can see why. You can understand why they did these things. And I think that's a really cool little sort of parallel between these two series. Maybe this is a reach, okay? Maybe this is a stretch, but I think that definitely could be true. Also, the book series for Game of Thrones is called A Song of Ice and Fire. In chapter 4, we used ice on Dowie, and now in this chapter, we're going to be using fire. Another coincidence? Maybe, but come on. We've talked before about the idea that Poppy Playtime has been compared to Star Wars, and I think that's also a story about how villains are not always as villainous as they seem. Darth Vader was seen as this ultimate villain, and yet when you actually got to know him, you can see why. Yeah, he is a villain. He killed the younglings. He killed those younglings. Okay, I probably can't say that anymore on YouTube. But you know what he did. That I hate that scene. That scene's trash. But everything else apart from that, you can understand why. Anakin became Vader to try and save the woman he loved. He saw the Jedi as wrong because they told him it was wrong to love. And so in his mind, that was wrong. And so he was doing what was right up until the point of where he realized what he was doing was wrong, but it was too late. And then he had his redemption arc, and then he became kind of good again if we just ignore the fact that he did what he did. He did it. Just like many other characters in many other shows and movies and books, I think the prototype isn't the evil that you think he is, and I think this is proof of that. But anyway, this was my little breakdown of this trailer. It was excellent. I actually really enjoyed the tone of this trailer. There was some really dark stuff in this trailer, and I'm hoping that Chapter 5 is as dark as Chapters 3 and 4, because this whole series has been very dark, and I hope that continues. So, what did you think? Did you love the trailer? Did you like my little theory? Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, I will be making a ton of content on Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 when it releases, as well as all the other games that are releasing early this year. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.